Stardust by Neil Gaiman. Chapter 5, in which there was much fighting for the crown. In the morning's bright light, the young lady seemed more human and less ethereal. She had said nothing since Tristran had woken. He took his knife and cut a fallen tree branch into a Y-shaped crutch, while she sat beneath the sycamore tree and glared at him and glowered at him and scowled at him from her place on the ground. He peeled the bark back from the green branch and wound it around the upper fork of the Y. They had no breakfast yet, and Tristran was ravenous. His stomach rumbled as he worked. The star had said nothing about being hungry. Then again, she had done nothing but look at him, first reproachfully, and then with undistinguished hatred. He pulled the bark tight and looped it under itself and tugged on it once more. "This is honestly nothing personal," he said to the woman and to the grove. With the full sunlight shining down, she scarcely glittered at all, save for where the darkest shadows touched her. The star ran one pale finger up and down the silver chain that went between them, tracing the line of it about her slim wrist, and made no reply. "I did it for love," he continued, "and you really are my only hope. Her name, that is, the name of my love, is Victoria Forrester, and she is the prettiest, wisest, sweetest girl in the whole wide world." The girl broke her silence with a snort of derision. "And this wise, sweet creature sent you here to torture me?" she said. "Well, not exactly. You see, she promised me anything I desired, be it her hand in marriage or her lips to kiss. Were I to bring her the star that we saw fall the night before last, and I had thought," he confessed, "that a fallen star would probably look like a diamond or a rock. I certainly wasn't expecting a lady." "So, having found a lady, could you have not come to her aid, or left her alone? Why drag her into your foolishness?" "Love," he explained. She looked at him with eyes the blue of the sky. "I hope you choke on it," she said flatly. "I won't," said Tristran, with more confidence and good cheer than he actually felt. "Here, try this." He passed her the crutch, and reaching down, tried to help her to her feet. His hands tingled, not unpleasantly, where the skin touched hers. She sat on the ground like a tree stump, making no effort to get up. "I told you," she said, "that I would do everything in my power to frustrate your plans and devices." She looked around the grove. "How very bland this world does look by day, and how dull. Just put your weight on me, and the rest on the crutch," he said. "You'll have to move sometime." He tugged on the chain, and reluctantly, the star began to get to her feet, leaning first against Tristran, and then, if the proximity to him disgusted her, on the crutch. She gasped, then in a hard intake of breath, and tumbled to the grass, where she lay with her face contorted, making small noises of pain. Tristran knelt down beside her. "What's wrong?" he asked. Her blue eyes flashed, but they were swimming with tears. "My leg! I can't stand on it! It must really be broken!" Her skin had gone as white as the cloud, and she was shivering. "I'm sorry," said Tristran, uselessly. "I can make you a splint. I've done it for sheep. It'll be all right." He squeezed her hand, and then he went to the brook and dipped his handkerchief in it and gave it to the star to wipe her forehead. He split more fallen wood with his knife. Then he removed his jerkin and took off his shirt, which he proceeded to tear into strips, which he used to bind the sticks as firmly as he could about her injured leg. The star made no sounds while he did this, although when he pulled the last knot tight, he thought he heard her whimper to herself. "Really," he told her, "we ought to get you to a proper doctor. I'm not a surgeon or anything." "No," she said dryly. "You astonish me." He let her rest for a little in the sun, and then he said, "Better try again, I suppose." And he raised her to her feet. They left the glade in a hobble, the star leaning heavily on her crutch and on Tristran's arm, wincing at every step, and every time she winced or flinched, Tristran felt guilty and awkward, but he calmed himself by thinking of Victoria Forrester's gray eyes. They followed a deer path through the hazelwood, while Tristran, who had decided the right thing to do was to make conversation with the star, asked how long she had been a star, whether it was enjoyable to be a star, and whether all stars were women, and informed her that he had always supposed stars to be, as Mrs. Cherry had taught them, flaming balls of burning gas many hundreds of miles across, just like the sun, only further away. To all these questions and statements she made no answer. "So, why did you fall?" he asked. "Did you trip over something?" She stopped moving, and turned and stared at him, as if she were examining something quite unpleasant a very long way away. "I did not trip," she said at length. "I was hit by this." She reached into her dress and pulled out a large yellowish stone, which dangled from 2 links of silver train. "There's a bruise on my side where it hit me and knocked me from the sky. And now I'm obligated to carry it about with me. Why?" She seemed as if she were about to answer, and then she shook her head, and her lips closed. And she said nothing at all. A stream riled and splashed to their right, keeping pace with them. The noonday sun was overhead, and Tristran found himself getting increasingly hungry. He took out the heel of the dry loaf from his bag, moistened it in the stream, and shared it out half and half. The star inspected the wet bread with disdain, and did not put it in her mouth. "You'll starve," warned Tristran. She said nothing, just raised her chin a little higher. They continued through the woodland, making slow progress. They were laboring up a deer path on the side of the hill, which led them over fallen trees, which now became so steep it threatened to tumble the stumbling star and her captor down to the bottom. "Is there not an easier path?" asked the star, at length. "Some kind of road or a level clearing?" And once the question was asked, Tristran knew the answer. "There is a road half a mile that way," he told her, pointing. "And a clearing over there, beyond that thicket," he said, turning to motion in another direction. "You knew that?" "Yes, no, well, I only knew it once you asked me." "Let us make for the clearing," she said, and they pushed through the thicket as best they could. It still took them the better part of an hour to reach the clearing, but the ground, when they got there, was as level as that of a playing field. That space seemed to have been cleared with a purpose, but what that purpose was, Tristran could not imagine. In the center of the glade, on the grass some distance from them, was an ornate golden crown, which glittered in the afternoon sunlight. It was studded with red and blue stones. "Rubies and sapphires," thought Tristran. He was about to walk over to the crown when the star touched his arm and said, "Wait, do you hear drums?" He realized that he did, a low, throbbing beat, coming from all around them, near at hand and far away, which echoed through the hills. And then there came a loud crashing noise from the trees at the far side of the clearing, and a high, wordless screaming. Into the glade came a huge white horse, its flanks gashed and bloody. It charged into the middle of the clearing, and then it turned and lowered its head, and faced its pursuer, which mounted into the clearing with a growl that made Tristran's flesh prickle. It was a lion, but it looked little enough like the lion Tristran had seen in the fair in the next village, which had been mangy, toothless, roomy thing. This lion was huge, the color of sand in the late afternoon. It entered the clearing at a run, and then it stopped and snarled at the white horse. The horse looked terrified. Its mane was matted in sweat and blood, and its eyes were wild. Also, Tristran realized it had a long ivory horn jutting from the center of its forehead. It reared up its hind legs, whining and snorting, an unshod hoof connected with the lion's shoulder, causing the lion to howl like a huge scalded cat, and to spring backwards. Then, keeping its distance, the lion circled the wary unicorn, its golden eyes at all times fixed upon the sharp horn that was always turned toward it. "Stop them," whispered the star. "They will kill each other." The lion growled at the unicorn. It began as a soft growl, like distant thunder, and finished as a roar that shook the trees and the rocks in the valley and the sky. Then the lion sprang and the unicorn plunged, and the glade was filled with gold and silver and red. For the lion was on the unicorn's back, claws gashed deeply into its flanks, mouth at its neck, and the unicorn was wailing and buckling and throwing itself onto its back in an effort to dislodge the great cat, flailing uselessly with its hooves and its horn in an effort to reach its tormentor. "Please do something. The lion will kill him," pleaded the girl urgently. Tristran would have explained to her that all he could possibly hope for if he approached the raging beasts was to be skewered and kicked and clawed and eaten. And he would further have explained that, should he somehow survive approaching them, there was still nothing that he could do, having with him not even a pail of water, which had been the traditional method of breaking up animal fights in wall. But by the time these thoughts had gone through his head, Tristran was already standing in the center of the clearing, an arm's length from the beasts. The scent of the lion was deep, animal, and terrifying, and Tristran was close enough to see the beseeching expression in the unicorn's black eyes. The lion and the unicorn were fighting for the crown, thought Tristran to himself, remembering her old nursery rhyme. The lion beat the unicorn all about the town. He beat him once. He beat him twice. With all his might and main. He beat him 3 times over, his power to maintain. And with that, he picked up the crown from the grass. It was as heavy and as soft as lead. He walked toward the animals, talking to the lion as he had talked to the ill-tempered rams and agitated ewes in his father's field, saying, "Here now, easy. Here's your crown." The lion shook the unicorn in his jaws, like a cat worrying a woolen scarf, and darted a look of pure puzzlement at Tristran. "Hello," said Tristran. There were burrs and leaves in the lion's mane. He held the heavy crown out toward the great beast. "You won. Let the unicorn go." And he took a step closer. Then he reached out with trembling hands and placed the crown upon the lion's head. The lion clambered off the prone body of the unicorn and began to pad, silently about the clearing, its head raised high. It reached the edge of the wood, where it paused for several minutes to lick its wounds with its red tongue. And then, purring like an earthquake, the lion slipped away into the forest. The star hobbled over to the injured unicorn and lowered herself to the grass awkwardly. Her broken legs played out by her side. She stroked its head. Poor creature," she said. It opened its dark eyes and stared at her. And then it laid its head upon her lap, and it closed its eyes once more. That evening, Tristran ate the last of the hard bread for his supper, and the star ate nothing at all. She had insisted they wait beside the unicorn, and Tristran had not the heart to refuse her. The clearing was dark now. The sky above them was filled with the twinkling of 1,000 stars. The Star Woman glittered too, as if she had been brushed by the Milky Way, while the unicorn glowed gently in the darkness, like a moon seen through clouds. Tristran lay beside the huge bulk of the unicorn, feeling its warmth radiating out into the night. The star was laying on the other side of the beast. It sounded almost as if she were murmuring a song to the unicorn. Tristran wished that he could hear her properly. The fragments of melody he could make out were strange and tantalizing, but she sang so quietly he could hear next to nothing at all. His fingers touched the chain that bound them. Cold as snow it was, and tenuous as moonlight on the mill pond, or the glint of light on a trout's silver scales, as it rises at dusk to feed, and soon he slept. The Witch Queen drove her chariot down the forest path, lashing the flanks of the twin white willy goats with a whip when they flagged. They had observed the small cooking fire burning beside the path from almost half a mile back, and she knew from the color of the flames that it was the fire of one of her people. For which fire burns with certain unusual hues. So she reined in her goats when she reached the brightly painted gypsy caravan, and the cooking fire, and the iron-haired old woman who sat beside the fire, tending to the spit over the flames, on which a hare was roasting. Fat dripped from the hare's open gut, hissing and sizzling in the fire, which gave off the twin aromas of cooking meat and of wood smoke. A multicolored bird sat by the driver's seat at the front of the caravan, on a wooden perch. It raised its feathers and called out in alarm when it saw the Witch Queen, but it was chained to its perch and could not leave.
"Before you says anything," said the gray-haired woman, "I should tell you that I'm just a poor old flower sailor, a harmless old biddy who's never done nothing to no one, and that the sight of a grand and terrifying lady such as yourself fills me with dread and fear."
"I will not harm you," said the Witch Queen. The harridan screwed her eyes to slits, and looked the lady in the red kirtle up and down.
"That's what you says," she said. "But how am I to know that it's so? A sweet old dear like me, who's all in a tremble from her toes to her water. You might be planning to rob me in the night, or worse."
And she poked the fire with the stick, so it leapt up. The smell of the cooked meat hung in the still evening air. "I swear," said the lady in the scarlet kirtle, "that by the rules and constraints of the sisterhood to which you and I belong, by the puissance of the Lelam, and by my lips and breasts and maidenhood, that I mean you no harm, and shall treat you as if you were my own guest."
"That's good enough for me, dearie ducks,"
said the old woman, her face breaking into a smile.
"Come and sit down. Supper will be cooked in 2 shakes of a lamb's tail."
"With good will," said the lady in the red kirtle. The goat snuffled and munched at the grass and the leaves beside the chariot. eyeing with distaste the tethered mules that pulled the caravan.
"Fine goats,"
said the harridan. The Witch Queen inclined her head and smiled modestly. The firelight glinted on the little scarlet snake wrapped as a bracelet around her wrist. The harridan went on.
"Now, my dear, my old eyes aren't what once they were, by any means. But would I be correct in supposing that one of those fine fellows started life walking on 2 legs, not 4?
Such things have been heard of, admitted the Witch Queen. That splendid bird of yours, for example.
That bird gave away one of the prizes of my stock of items for sale. Gave it away to a good-for-nothing nearly 20 years ago, and afterward, the trouble she put me through scarcely bears considering. So these days she stays a bird, unless there's work that needs doing, and the flower stalls are run. And if I can find a good strong servant, not afraid of a little hard work, why then she would stay a bird forever."
The bird chirped sadly upon her perch.
"They call me Mistress Emile,"
said the harridan. They called you Ditchwater Sal when you were a young chit of a thing, thought the Witch Queen. But she did not say this aloud. You may call me Morwenegg, said the witch instead. It was, she reflected, almost a joke, for Morwenegg means wave of the sea, and her true name was long since drowned and lost beneath the cold ocean. Mistress Emile got to her feet and made her way into the interior of the caravan, emerging with 2 painted wooden bowls, 2 wooden-handled knives, and a small pot of herbs, dried and flaked to a green powder.
"I was going to be eating with fingers on a plate of fresh leaves,"
she said, handing a bowl to the lady in the scarlet kirtle. The bowl had a sunflower painted upon it, under a layer of dust.
But I thought, well, how often does I get such fine company? So nothing but the best, heads or tails.
Let it be your choice, said her guest.
Head then, for you, with the luscious eyes and brains, and the crispy, crunchy ears of him. And I'll have the rump, with nothing but dull meat to nibble.
She lifted the spit off the fire as she spoke, and using both knives so fast it seemed little more than a glitter of blades, she parted the carcass and sliced the meat from the bones, and dealt it out, fairly equitably, into each bowl. She passed the pot of herbs to her guest.
There's no salt, my dear, but if you shake this on, it will do the trick. A little basil, a little mountain thyme, my own recipe.
The Witch Queen took her portion of roasted hare and one of the knives, and sprinkled a little of the herbs onto the dish. She speared a bite on the point of the knife, and ate it with relish, while her hostess toyed with her own portion, then blew on it fastidiously, steam coming from the crisp brown meat.
"How is it?"
asked the old woman. Perfectly palatable, said her guest honestly.
It is the herbs that make it so fine,
explained the harridan. I can taste the basil and the thymine, said the guest. But there is another taste I find harder to place.
Ah?
Said Madame Semele, and she nibbled a sliver of the meat. It is certainly a most uncommon taste.
That it is. It's a herb that grows only in Garamond, on an island in the midst of a wide lake. It is the most pleasant with all manner of meats and fishes, and it reminds me in flavor a little of the leaves of fennel, with but a hint of nutmeg. The flowers of it are the most attractive shades of orange. It is good for wind and the ague, and it is, in addition, a gentle soporific, which has the curious property of causing one who tastes of it to speak nothing but the truth for several hours.
The lady in the scarlet kirtle dropped her wooden bowl onto the ground. Limbus grass, she said. You dared to feed me limbus grass?
That's how it would seem, dearie.
And the old woman cackled and hooted with delight.
So tell me now, Mistress Monoweg, if that's your name, where are you a-going of in your fine chariot? And why do you remind me so of someone I knew once? And Madame Semele forgets nothing and no one.
I am on my way to find a star, said the Witch Queen, which fell in the great woods on the other side of Mount Belly. And when I find her, I shall take my great knife and cut out her heart, while she lives and while her heart is her own. For the heart of a living star is a sovereign remedy against all snares of age and time. My sisters wait for me to return. Madame Semele hooted and hugged herself, swaying back and forth, bony fingers clutching her sides.
The heart of a star, is it? It's such a prize it will make for me. I shall taste enough of it, that my youth will come back, and my hair from gray to golden, and my dugs swell and soften and become firm and high. Then I shall take all the heart that's left to the great market at Wall. He.
You shall not do this thing, said her guest very quietly.
No, you are my guest, my dear. You swore your oath. You've tasted my food. According to the laws of the sisterhood, there is nothing you can do to harm me.
Oh, there are so many things I could do to harm you, Ditchwater Sal. But I shall simply point out that one who has eaten limbus grass can speak nothing but the truth for several hours afterward. And one more thing. Distant lightning flickered in her words as she spoke, and the forest was hushed, as if every leaf and every tree were listening intently to what she said. This I say, you have stolen knowledge you did not earn, but it shall not profit you. For you shall be unable to see the star, unable to perceive it, unable to touch it, to taste it, to find it, to kill it. Even if another were to cut out its heart and give it to you, you would not know it, never know you had it in your hand. This I say, these are my words, and they are a true speaking. And know this also, I swore by my compact of the sisterhood, that I would do you no harm. Had I not sworn, I would change you into a black beetle, and I will pull your legs off one by one, and leave you for the birds to find, for putting me to this indignity. Madame Semille's eyes opened wide with fright, and she stared over the flames of the fire at her guest.
Who are you?
She said. When you knew me last, said the woman in the scarlet kirtle, I ruled with my sisters in Carnadine, before it was lost.
You? But you are dead, long dead.
They have said that the Leland were dead before now, but they have always lied. The squirrel has not yet found the acorn that will grow into the oak that will be cut to form the cradle of the babe who will grow to slay me. Silver flashes glittered and flared in the flames as she spoke.
So it is you, and you have your youth back.
Madame Semille sighed.
And now I too shall be young again.
The lady in the scarlet kirtle stood up and placed the bowl, which had contained her portion of the hair, into the fire. You shall be nothing of the kind, she said. Did you not hear me? A moment after I leave, you shall forget that you ever saw me. You shall forget all of this, even my curse, although the knowledge of it shall vex and irritate you, like an itch in a limb long since amputated. And may you treat your guests with more grace and respect in the future. The wooden bowl burst into flames, then a huge gout of flame which singed the leaves of the oak tree far above them. Madame Semille knocked the blackened bowl from the fire with the stick, and she stamped it out in the long grass.
Whatever could have possessed me to drop the bowl into the fire? She exclaimed aloud. And look, one of my nice knives, all burnt up and ruined. Whatever was I thinking of?
There came no answer. From further down the road came the drumming beats of something that might have been the hooves of goats racing on into the night. Madame Semille shook her head, as if to clear it of dust and cobwebs.
I'm getting old,
she said to the multicolored bird, who sat on his perch by the driver's seat, and who had observed everything and forgotten nothing.
Getting old, and there's no doing anything about that.
The bird shifted uncomfortably on the perch. A red squirrel quested, hesitating a little, into the firelight. It picked up an acorn, held it for a moment in its hand-like front paws, as if it were praying. Then it ran away, to bury an acorn and to forget it. Skateseb is a small seaport town built in granite, a town of chandlers and carpenters and sailmakers, of old sailors with missing fingers and limbs, who have opened their own grog-houses, nor spend their days in them, what is left of their hair still tarred into long queues, though the stubble on their chins has long since dusted to white. There are no whores in Skateseb, or none that consider themselves as such, although there have been many women who, if pressed, would describe themselves as much married, with one husband on this ship or every 6 months, and another husband on that ship back in port for a month or so every 9 months. The mathematics of the thing have always kept most folks satisfied, and if ever it disappoints and a man returns to his wife while one of her other husbands is still in the company, why then there is a fight, and the grog shops to comfort the loser. The sailors do not mind the arrangement, for they know that this way there will, at least, be one person who, at the last, will notice when they do not come back from the sea, and will mourn their loss, and their wives content themselves with the certain knowledge that their husbands are also unfaithful, for there is no competing with the sea in a man's affections, since she is both mother and mistress, and she will wash the corpse also in the time to come, wash it to coral, ivory, and pearls. So it was to escape Seb that Lord Primus of Stormhold came one night, all dressed in black with a beard as thick and serious as one of the stork's nest in the town's chimney. He came in a carriage drawn by 4 black horses, and he took a room in the Seaman's Rest on Crook Street. He was considered the most peculiar in his needs and requests, for he brought his own food and drink into his rooms, and kept it locked within a wooden chest, which he would only open to take himself an apple, or a wedge of cheese, or a cup of pepper wine. His was the topmost room in the Seaman's Rest, a high and spindly building built on a rocky outcrop to facilitate smuggling. He bribed a number of local street urchins to report to him the moment they saw any fellow they did not know come to town, by land or sea in particular. They were to look for a very tall, angular, dark-haired fellow, with a thin, hungry face and blank eyes. "Primus is certainly learning caution," said Secondus to his 4 other dead brothers.
Well, you know what they say,
whispered Quintus, in the wistful tones of the dead, which sounded on that day like the lapping of distant waves upon the shingle.
A man who is tired of looking over his shoulder for Septimus is tired of life.
In the mornings, Primus would talk to the sea captains, with ships and skate Seb, buying them grog liberally, but neither drinking nor eating with them. In the afternoon, he would inspect the ships in the docks. Soon the gossips of Skay Seb, and there were many, had the gist and juice of it all. The bearded gentleman was to be taking ship to the east, and this tale was soon chased by another, that he would be sailing out on the Heart of a Dream under Captain Jan, a black-trimmed ship with its decks painted crimson red, of more or less savory reputation, by which I mean it was generally held that she kept her piracies for distant waters, and this would be happening as soon as he gave the word.
"Good master," said the street urchin to Lord Primus, "there is a man in town, come by land. He lodges with Mistress Petier. He is thin and crow-like, and I saw him in the ocean's roar, buying grog for every man in the room. He says he's a distressed seafaring man, seeking a berth."
Primus patted the boy's filthy head and handed him a coin. Then he returned to his preparations, and that afternoon it was announced that the Heart of a Dream would leave harbor in 3 short days. The day before the Heart of a Dream was to set sail, Primus was seen to sell his coach and 4 horses to a stableman on Wardle Street, after which he walked down to the quay, dispensing small coins to the urchins. He entered his cabin in the Heart of a Dream, and gave strict orders that none was to disturb him, for any reason, good or bad, until they were at least a week out of port. That evening, an unfortunate accident befell an able seaman, who had crewed the rigging on the Heart of a Dream. He fell, when drunk, on the slippery cobblestones of Revenue Street, and broke his hip. Luckily, there was a replacement at the ready, the very sailor with whom he had been drinking that evening, and to whom the injured man had been persuaded to demonstrate a particularly complicated hornpipe step on the wet cobblestones. And the sailor, tall, dark, and crow-like, marked his ship's papers with a circle that night and was on deck at dawn when the ship sailed out in the harbor on the morning mist. The Heart of the Dream sailed east. Lord Primus of Stormhold, his beard freshly shaven, watched it sail from the cliff top until it was lost to view. Then he walked down to Wardle Street, where he returned the stableman's money and something more besides, and he rode off on the coast road toward the west in a dark coach pulled by 4 black horses. It was an obvious solution. After all, the unicorn had been ambling hugely behind them for most of the morning, occasionally nudging the star's shoulder with his big forehead. The wounds on his dappled flanks, which had blossomed like red flowers under the lion's claws the day before, were now dried to brown and scabbed over. The star limped and hobbled and stumbled, and Tristran walked beside her, cold chain binding wrist to wrist. On the one hand, Tristran felt there was something almost sacrilegious about the idea of riding the unicorn. It was not a horse, did not subscribe to any of the ancient pacts between man and horse. There was a wildness in its black eyes, a twisting spring in its step, which was dangerous and untamed. On the other hand, Tristran had begun to feel in a way that he could not articulate, that the unicorn cared about the star and wished to help her. So he said, "Look, I know all that stuff about frustrating my plans every step of the way, but if the unicorn is willing, perhaps it would carry you on its back for a little of the way." The star said nothing.
Well?
She shrugged. Tristran turned to the unicorn, stared into its pool black eyes.
Can you understand me?
He asked. It said nothing. He had hoped it would nod its head or stamp its hoof, like a trained horse he had once seen in the village green when he was younger, but it simply stared.
Will you carry the lady, please?
The beast said not a word, nor did it nod or stamp, but it walked to the star, and it knelt down at her feet. Tristran helped the star onto the unicorn's back. She grasped its tangled mane with both hands, and sat side saddle upon it, her broken leg sticking out, and that was how they traveled for some hours. Tristran walked beside them, carrying her crutch over his shoulder, with his bag dangling from the end. He found it as hard to travel with the star riding the unicorn as it had been before. Then he had been forced to walk slowly, trying to keep in pace with the star's limping hobble. Now he was hurrying to keep up with the unicorn, nervous lest the unicorn should get too far ahead and the chain that linked them both should pull the star from the beast's back. His stomach rumbled as he walked. He was painfully aware how hungry he was, and Tristran began to think to himself as nothing more than hunger, thinly surrounded by flesh. And as fast as he could, walking, he stumbled and knew that he was going to fall.
Please stop,
he gasped. The unicorn slowed and stopped. The star looked down at him, then she made a face and shook her head.
You had better come up here too, she said, if the unicorn will let you. Otherwise you'll just faint or something and drag me onto the ground with you. And we need to go somewhere that you can get food.
Tristran nodded gratefully. The unicorn appeared to offer no opposition, waiting passively so Tristran attempted to clamber up onto it. It was like climbing a sheer wall, and as fruitless. Eventually Tristran led the animal over to a beech tree that had been uprooted several years before by a storm, or a high wind, or an irritable giant, and holding his bag and the star's crutch, he scrambled up the roots onto the trunk, and from there onto the back of the unicorn.
There is a village on the other side of that hill, said Tristran. I expect that we can find something to eat when we get there.
He patted the unicorn's flanks with his free hand. The beast began to walk. Tristran moved his hand to the star's waist to steady himself. He could feel the silken texture of her thin dress, and beneath that, the thick chain of the topaz around her waist. Riding a unicorn was not like riding a horse. It did not move like a horse. It was a wilder ride, and a stranger one. The unicorn waited until Tristran and the star were comfortable upon its back, and then slowly and easily it began to put on speed. The trees surged and leapt past them. The star leaned forward, her fingers tangled in the unicorn's mane. Tristran, his hunger forgotten and his fear, gripped the sides of the unicorn with his knees and simply prayed that he would not be knocked to the ground by a stray branch. Soon he found he was beginning to enjoy the experience. There is something about riding a unicorn, for those people who still can, which is unlike any other experience, exhilarating and intoxicating and fine. The sun was setting when they reached the outskirts of the village. In a rolling meadow beneath the oak tree, the unicorn came to a skittish halt and would go no further. Tristran dismounted and landed with a bump on the grass of the meadow. His rump felt sore, but with the star looking down at him, uncomplaining, he dared not rub it.
Are you hungry?
He asked the star. She said nothing.
Look, he said. I'm starving, perhaps perfectly famished. I don't know if stars eat or what they eat, but I won't have you starving yourself.
He looked up at her, questioning. She stared down at him first impassively. Then in a trice, her blue eyes filled with tears, she raised a hand to her face and wiped away the tears, leaving a smudge of mud on her cheeks.
We eat only darkness, she said, and we drink only light, so I'm not hungry. I'm lonely and scared and cold and miserable and captured, but I'm not hungry.
Don't cry, said Tristran.
Look, I'll go into the village and get some food. You just wait here. The unicorn will protect you if anyone comes.
He reached up and gently lifted her down from the unicorn's back. The unicorn shook its mane, then began to crop the grass of the meadow contently. The star sniffled.
Wait here?
She asked, holding up the chain that joined them.
Oh,
said Tristran.
Give me your hand.
She reached her hand out to him. He fumbled with the chain to undo it, but it would not undo. Said Tristran. He tugged at the chain around his own wrist, but it too held fast.
It looks, he said, as if I'm tied to you as you are to me.
The star threw her hair back, closed her eyes, and sighed deeply. And then, opening her eyes once again, self-possessed, she said,
Perhaps there's a magic word or something. I don't know any magic words,
said Tristran. He held the chain up. It glittered red and purple in the light of the setting sun.
Please?
He said. There was a ripple in the fabric of the chain, and he slid his hand out of it.
Here you go,
he said, passing the star the other end of the chain that had bound her.
I'll try not to be too long. And if any of the fair folk sing their silly songs at you, for heaven's sake, don't throw your crutch at them. They'll only steal it.
I won't, she said.
I'll have to trust you, on your honor as a star, not to run away, he said.
She touched her splinted leg.
I'll do no running for quite some time,
she said, pointedly. And with that, Tristran had to content himself. He walked the last half mile into the village. It had no end, being far off the beaten track for travelers. But the portly old woman who explained this to him then insisted he accompany her to a cottage, where she pressed upon him a wooden bowl full of barley porridge, with carrots in it, and a mug of small beer. He exchanged his cambric handkerchief for a bottle of elderflower cordial, a round of green cheese, and a number of unfamiliar fruits. They were soft and fuzzy like apricots, but were the purple blue of grapes, and they smelled a little like ripe pears. Also, the woman gave him a small bale of hay for the unicorn. He walked back to the meadow where he had left them, munching on a piece of the fruit, which was juicy and chewy and quite sweet. He wondered if the star would like to try one, whether she would like it if she did. She hoped that she would be pleased with what she had brought her. At first, Tristran thought he must have made a mistake, and that he had lost his way in the moonlight. No, that was the same oak tree, the one beneath which the star had been sitting.
Hello,
he called. Glowworms and fireflies glittered green and yellow in the hedgerows and in the branches of the trees. There came no reply, and Tristran felt a sick, stupid feeling in the pit of his stomach.
Hello?
He called. He stopped calling then, because there was no one to answer. He dropped the bale of hay, and then he kicked it. She was to the southwest of him, moving faster than he could walk. He followed after her in the bright moonlight. Inside he felt numbed and foolish, stung by a pang of guilt and shame and regret. He should not have loosened the chain. He should have tied it to a tree. He should have forced the star to go with them into the village. This went through his head as he walked. But another voice spoke to him, also, pointing out that if he had not unchained her then, he would have done it sometime soon, and she would have run from him then. He wondered if he would ever see the star again, and he stumbled over roots as the way led him between old trees into the deep woods. The moonlight slowly vanished beneath the thick canopy of leaves, and after stumbling vainly in the dark for a short while, he laid himself down beneath a tree, rested his head on his bag, and closed his eyes, and felt sorry for himself until he fell asleep. On a rocky mountain pass, on the southernmost slopes of Mount Belly, the Witch Queen reined in her goat chariot, and stopped and sniffed the chilly air. The myriad stars hung cold in the sky above her. Her red lips curved into a smile of such beauty, such brilliance, such pure and perfect happiness, that would have frozen your blood in your veins to have seen it.
There, she said. She is coming.
And the wind in the mountain pass howled about her triumphantly, as if in answer. Primus sat beside the embers of his fire, and he shivered beneath his thick black robe. One of the black stallions, waking or dreaming, whined and snorted, and then rested once more. Primus's face felt strangely cold. He missed his thick beard. With the stick, he pushed the clay ball from the embers. He spat on his hands. He then split open the hot clay and smelled the sweet flesh of the hedgehog, which had cooked slowly on the embers as he slept. He ate his breakfast meticulously, spitting the tiny bones into the fire circle once he had chewed the meat from them. He washed the hedgehog down with a lump of hard cheese and a slightly vine-gray white wine. Once he had eaten, he wiped his hands upon his robe, and then cast the runes to find the topaz stone, which conferred the lordship of the crag towns and the vast estates of the Stormhold. He cast them, then he stared, puzzled at the small, square red granite tiles. He picked them up once more, shook them in his long-fingered hands, dropped him to the ground, and stared at them again. Then Primus spat into the embers, which hissed lazily. He swept the tiles up and dropped them into the pouch at his belt. "It's moving faster, further," said Primus to himself. He pissed on the embers of the fire, for he was in wild country, and there were bandits and hobgoblins, and worse in those lands, and he had no desire to alert them to his presence. Then he hitched the horses to the carriage and climbed into the driver's seat and drove them toward the forest to the west, and to the mountain range beyond. The girl held tight to the unicorn's neck as it tumbled headlong through the dark forest. There was no moonlight between the trees, but the unicorn glimmered and shone with pale light, like the moon, while the girl herself glittered and glowed, as if she trailed dust of lights. And as she passed through the trees, it might have appeared to a distant observer that she seemed like a twinkle, on and off and on, like a tiny star.